Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. It's good to have you all here. A few administrative notes in the beginning here. We are recording this webinar, and we will make the recording available on the IALA YouTube channel. I must ask you to keep your microphones muted and switch your cameras off to avoid interruption of the speakers and to conserve bandwidth. During the seminar, you can pose questions in the chat box area, and we will attend to these after the presentations have been made. So my name is Omar Fritz Eriksson, and I am the Deputy Secretary General of IALA, and I am also the Dean of the IALA Worldwide Academy. I welcome you all to this webinar, which is part of a series of webinars designed to inform a wider audience on the most recent outcomes of the work of our 4 technical committees. The technical committees have a 4-year working cycle where they put a lot of effort into developing standards, recommendations, guidelines, and other documents, which then are published and made available as guidance worldwide. And in the context of marine aids navigation, which also includes vessel traffic services, the recommendations tell us what one should be doing when providing marine aids navigation services, and our guidelines tell us how you should go about it and describe best practices worldwide. Once the committees have developed a document, it is submitted to our council for approval. Once the council has approved documents, they are published and made available to the world on our website. So today we will present to you guideline G1161, which is titled Evaluation of Platforms for the Provision of Maritime Services in the Context of e-Navigation. So this document talks about the required criteria for next generation platforms which support the provision of maritime services in the context of e-navigation, and present an overview of relevant requirements that should be considered for the distribution of important maritime information. So please mute your microphones, please. Mr. Katik or Sensodan. Yeah, thank you. We have 2 speakers doing the presentation. The first speaker today is Dennis Jankowski, who has a master's degree in business informatics from the University of Oldenburg in Germany. Dennis is currently working as a research associate in the Office Institute for Information Technology. His research focus lies primarily on the secure data sharing within the maritime domain, which is quite important in this day and age, we know. And Dennis is an active contributor to the IALA technical committees, and I think has contributed heavily to the development of this document that we are presenting today. The other speaker today is Mr. Thomas Christensen, who will be known to many of you. Thomas had a variety of managing roles in different areas over the years, ranging from biotechnology to software development and medical equipment. But some 14 years ago, Thomas entered the maritime world, where he joined the Danish Maritime Authority and started working with me and became the leader of our e-navigation team at the time. Thomas has been involved in numerous European-funded projects focusing on e-navigation, such as the first efficiency project, the Axis project, and I think also the Mona Lisa and STM projects. And he was the manager of our second Efficiency 2 project with excellent results. Thomas was also the primary driving force behind the e-navigation on the way conferences, which carried on for a decade and has now been transformed into the Digital at Sea conference, which is a series of 3 annual conferences, give or take COVID, of course, focusing on the Asia Pacific region, the Americas, and the aspects of digitalization in the international maritime domain. To cut a long story short, Thomas is now the Secretary General of the Maritime Connectivity Platform Consortium, which is the governing body for the MCP, the Maritime Connectivity Platform. So let's get on with it. Dennis, you have the floor.
Thank you. Let me share my screen now.
We see your screen. Go ahead.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for your nice introduction. Yes, hello together. I'm Dennis Jankowski, and I am a research associate at the office. It's a research institute in Oldenburg, Germany. And in the last ENAF conference, we adopted a new guideline. It's the G1161. And the guideline has the name Evaluation of Platforms for the Provision of Maritime Services in the Context of e-navigation. And yeah, today I will give you, together with Thomas Christensen, an insight into the guideline and its content. In the first part, I will talk about the guideline itself. And in the second part, Thomas will present you an existing e-navigational platform, the Maritime Connectivity Platform. As you probably already know, there are already a lot of different so-called maritime services. Maritime services are intended to help maritime stakeholders to optimize their operational activities at sea and also to make them even safer. Maritime services can be services that provide the maritime stakeholders with useful information regarding some navigational warning or, for example, weather forecasts. However, they also can be services, for example, for the calculation of an optimal route for the ship based on its or based on the current environmental conditions. But in order to ensure that maritime services really offer some added value to the users, the crucial factor is that these services needs to be found by the stakeholders. Only when stakeholders are able to find and also obtain these services, they are able to improve their operations at sea. Currently, most maritime services are transmitted via own web pages from the service provider, some individual interfaces, or even application-specific messages from the AIS. In the guideline, we call this options legacy platforms. These legacy platforms still provide a great value for distributing maritime services in today's world. But all these legacy platforms had at least 2 big drawbacks in today's digital environments. The first point is that the platforms often do not have sufficient security mechanisms, such as encrypted data transfer, or like, for example, an encrypted data transfer. For example, if you want to send some sensitive data to one specific vessel, frequently this is not possible without the possibility that these messages can also be read by another ship. As mentioned earlier, another issue is finding and obtaining maritime services. At the moment, services are often distributed across many not harmonized legacy platforms. This makes it very difficult for maritime stakeholders to find services that are relevant for them. There's simply a lack of a central point where maritime stakeholders can search for maritime services. Exactly because of these problems, the maritime industry should start building a new generation of e-navigational platforms. The new generation of these platforms should take advantage of internet technologies for exactly this purpose. For years, it has been already standard practice on the internet to transmit messages, for example, in an encrypted form, or to obtain services in a standardized way. These concepts should also be applied on the maritime domain. But where's the problem right now? We can show this on the on one example of the legacy platform, the nav tags. In the case of navigational warnings, one way of providing this is through nav tags. Here, providers of the information have an infrastructure with radio equipment and antennas, enabling the transmission of this information on the frequency allocated to this specific purpose. On the receiver side, the user purchases a NavTex receiver, enabling the reception of this information on that specific frequency. Finding the navigational warning information, therefore, is simply a matter of listening to the right frequency. The authenticity of the information provider is to some extent given by the fact that the provider has the equipment which is able to transmit the signal. Although some rogue entity in principle could also have the same equipment and transmit malicious information for some devious purposes. Strictly speaking, the information provider is not authenticated, the identity of the information provider is not proven, and the integrity of the information that are provided is also not guaranteed. Exactly for this purpose, current existing internet technologies could be used without problems. When data is transmitted over the internet, the user can easily verify the origin of the received message with the help of the information provider's certificate. Any manipulated navigational warnings could be easily identified in this way, so they would no longer represent a real security risk. So, how do we define a platform? A platform is defined in G1161 as a system that facilitates the secure and reliable exchange of information and services between stakeholders. In the maritime domain, we have many challenges to overcome. For example, due to the global nature of shipping, we have a very distributed ecosystem of very heterogeneous maritime services. Due to many independent services, these services are also not harmonized with each other. The central goal of the upcoming platforms is to increase the interoperability between the platform participants, for example, by using standardized data formats or also access methods. Access methods. In this way, digitalization could increase the connectivity between stakeholders, and safety critical information could be also transmitted securely as it should be. This would further increase the safety and the efficiency on the sea in the near future. So G1161 defines a set of general criteria that digital platforms should fulfill. The guideline should serve as a basis for the selection and the development of these next generation platforms. In total, we identified 4 different categories of criteria during the last ENAF conferences. The categories are authentication and authorization, service discoverability, efficiency, robustness, and resilience, and cybersecurity. We will go into the individual criteria in more detail just in a moment. The realization of all the raised criteria should assure a secure and trustworthy communication on the sea. At the same time, the use of current technology trends should simplify and enable also the development of new and modern maritime services. So let's take a brief look at the individual criteria. A platform should allow users to authenticate to each other so that the user can verify the identity of another user. In this way, you can be sure that you are really communicating with the person you think you are communicating with. In addition, authorization is an important aspect. Authorization means that it is possible to assign different rights to different users. In doing so, it is possible to limit the access to certain sensitive information. The control which information can be seen by whom can be controlled. The next defined criterion is the service discoverability. A platform should provide a function to browse and offer maritime services. This can be realized by, this could be realized, for example, in the form of a catalog in which the different services are listed. Additionally, also the IALA G1128 should be used for the description of these services in the catalog. It provides a good machine-readable description, which makes the retrieval from the services more standardized and easy. Another criterion relates to a stable system architecture. In G1161, we defined that the platforms should be as efficient, robust, and resilient as possible. Efficiency in this context means that the platform requires as few resources as possible. This could, for example, refer to the low bandwidth at sea. A good platform should therefore use as little bandwidth as possible for the data exchange. Robustness means the ability to cope with errors. In addition, the system should also be able to work in not optimal situations, such as, for example, when a connection is lost at sea. Resilience, on the other hand, means that the system continues to function even in the case of unexpected events. In this case, the most important functions, like the transmission of navigational warnings, should still work. The last big cluster of criteria is called cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is defined as the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. For this purpose, some additional criteria have also been defined here, namely confidentiality and integrity and non-repudiation. Confidentiality means the definition and enforcement of appropriate access levels of information. So it should be possible for the data provider to restrict the access to some information as he wants. Integrity means that the exchange data should be protected against any manipulation. For example, by unauthorized parties, so that it can be proven, for example, that the data was not changed by anybody during its transmission. And last but not least, non-repudiation. Non-repudiation means that it should be as hard as possible to manipulate the content of messages so that the information exchange should be basically tamper-proof. In this way, no one can deny the validity of a transferred message. So now we know which criteria should be considered by developing or selecting an event navigational platform. But nevertheless, the individual platforms can still be implemented in many different ways so that the interoperability between the individual instances is still not guaranteed. It therefore so it would be therefore very important in the near future to standardize also the development of these platforms in the same way as we, for example, standardize technical services with the CCOM standard. It would be desirable if the critical functions of the platform were compatible with each other. This affects, for example, the authentication and also the authorization, for which the same method should be used between different platforms. But it is also very important to harmonize also functions like the described service discoverability, so that the services could be searched in the same way worldwide. Altogether, this would lead to more harmonization and a higher interoperability between different platform instances. But now we have the question, why do we need multiple platforms at all? Wouldn't it be better to have one central platform? In our opinion, the decentralized platform architecture is essential for the idea of e-navigational platforms. In the bottom line, it's all about trust. A central platform instance will never be trusted by all involved parties. However, since the maritime domain is very global, it is extremely important to increase the acceptance of these platforms as much as possible. The best option for this is to give everyone the option to provide their own instance. In addition, in this way, you also have to, you have the option to choose which instances you would like to trust and which you would like not to trust. According to the motto, Not everyone trusts everyone, but everyone trusts anybody. But the potential of many different platforms makes it even more important that the platform instances are harmonized with each other, as I already explained before. Externally, the platforms should behave exactly in the same way, so that, for example, an Actis should be able to use any platform without adopting its own software. So what is the conclusion? Traditional maritime communication channels and services are currently not secured. In this way, information can be easily manipulated, which is a major security risk. Digitalization already provides some existing useful solutions that only needs to be used to realize a safer maritime information exchange by using, for example, encryption or digital signatures. So internet technologies and digital navigational platforms makes a secure maritime information exchange possible for the first time. We just need to apply the existing methods appropriate for the maritime use case. So that was the presentation of the IALA G1161, and now I would like to hand over to Thomas Christensen, who is presenting us an existing e-navigational platform called the Maritime Connectivity Platform.
Thank you very much, Dennis, and thank you for the introduction, Omar. So the guideline presented here has an annex of one full page, which is giving an introduction to the MCP as an example of a platform to provide this framework for communication in the maritime domain. So from my point of view, the aim for this is not just being an example. The aim for the MCP is to be the framework for e-navigation and the framework for supporting information exchange in the maritime domain. That is at least the ambition with the MCP, nonetheless. Next, please. So I'll try to explain a little bit about how the MCP meets the different requirements and needs that was explained by Dennis. So Dennis was talking about different things. He was talking about the need for authentication and authorization, service discoverability, efficiency, robustness, and resilience, and cybersecurity, and the need for being decentralized. So I'll explain how the MCP meets these different requirements. Next, please. At the core of this, and what I think is the absolute most critical element here, is authentication. All these other aspects of securing information exchange in different way doesn't really matter if you don't know who you're talking to. So being able to identify and authenticate different entities exchanging information is absolute prerequisite for everything else that we are doing in e-navigation and digitalization. So in order to support that, the MCP has an identity registry where all entities, users, devices, machine can be registered and be authenticated. So you can assure that whoever is exchanging something or exposing a service or doing anything can be authenticated and prove their identity. Users can do it by logging in, like username and password, in the same way that you're doing when you log in with your Facebook account or your Google account. And machines, devices are doing it with a digital certificate issued by the identity registry. So this is the absolute core of the platforms, being able to do this. So you have the identification means, where we have the maritime resource names that provides the identities, and then you have this mechanism of authenticating that identity, so proving what is behind it. The MCP itself does not provide authorization, but authorization needs the authentication. So that is something you sort of build on top of it. it doesn't make sense for the platform to support directly authorization, because the platform needs to support all kinds of stakeholders, exchanging all kinds of information. So you don't really know which kind of roles for authentication that are needed. So trying to build that into the system doesn't make sense. So you build the authorization mechanism on top of the authentication mechanism. So the authentication is provided by the identity registry. The very, very core and the most important part of the platform. Next, please. So the other element was the service discoverability. And for that, there is a service registry. So in the service registry, all the services for the maritime domain, for e-navigation, for other purposes can be registered. So that would be kind of a phone book, yellow pages, where you can look up, you can search for the services, and then you find out where to find the services. You get an endpoint, like a phone number in the yellow pages, or like a URL for a web page. So it has an identifier of where to get the service from. And you can search this service registry by different means, by service types, keywords, and also, most importantly, by coverage area. So you could ask the service registry, who is providing, for instance, navigational warnings in this geographical area. And then you get an endpoint, and then you can consume your service, or the ECDIS can consume the service and get the data using that information, that endpoint, and get the service from the service provider. So that is the feature and what is supported by the MCP service registry. Next, please. Then we have the other elements: efficiency, robustness, and resilience, and cybersecurity. Not all of these make sense for the MCP on the top level. The MCP, as the consortium is defining it, is a set of standards, and then different organizations can implement and run their own MCP and become MCP service providers in that sense. So many of the aspects here of robustness and efficiency and resilience needs to be put into the actual implementation of the MCP. And of course, some aspects are put into the standards as well, like efficiency. We have thought about efficiency, for instance, in the matter of the key lengths of the certificates, in order to be able to provide this mechanism to low bandwidth communication channels. So some of these matters are built into the standards. But much of this applies actually to the implementation of the individual MCP, and of course also to the services that are implemented on the service provider side. Also, some of these aspects, when we are going into using the internet, are something that you can use existing internet protocols for, like SSL and mechanisms for providing integrity and confidentiality. And again, this requires the authentication provided by the MCP. The non-repudiation is something you can also build upon, but that is actually one aspect where we need to look into improving the MCP to be able to support and facilitate non-repudiation in a better way. So that's something that we at some point will look into to improving. Next, please. Decentralized and the matter of having platform versus platforms. So having several platforms, to me, is maybe not the right way to look at it, because these platforms, in order to make sense, needs to be harmonized themselves, in the same way as the different technical e-navigation services needs to be harmonized. We don't not want many different services, that we need to make new software in order to consume many different services providing the same type of data. We need one way to consume navigational warnings, one way to consume berthing information, VTS services. We don't want to be able to have to implement many different services. We don't also need different platforms where we need to make specific code to interact with different platforms. We don't need different types of certificates following different formats. We need harmonized formats for that. So basically, what the MCP is, it is not one system. It is many platforms, but many harmonized platforms. Or you could say it is one system, but one decentralized system. So there's not one physical MCP. Everybody can run their own MCP and thus be MCP service providers. So it is totally decentralized. The MCP consortium can endorse MCP providers, which make sure that the MCP instances are following the standards put forward by the consortium. So we are ensuring interoperability. And we are also providing some basic level of trust, but only some basic level. Again, we cannot provide trust that serves all purposes. Again, the ambition is that this system will be used by many different stakeholders and providing and facilitating exchange of very different kinds of information. And that requires very different trust levels. So different organizations will trust different MCP instances for different things and in different contexts. And the system will facilitate that in a very flexible way. So the MCP, when we talk about the MCP, that is the concept, and underneath there is actually operationally many different MCP instances running. So a totally decentralized system. So in that way, the MCP could be the answer to the requirement for platforms for e-navigation in that way. Next, please. So this is not something that was in the actual guideline, but in order to have the MCP, we also need to have some governance, somebody that endorses MCP instances, somebody that maintains and develops the different standards and procedures that are associated with it. So for that purpose, a consortium has been established, modeled after the World Wide Web Consortium, that is taking care of these standards, bringing them forward. And it is a very open forum. Everybody is able to join and take part of the development and take part of the governance and collaborative ownership of the MCP. So everybody is invited to join that. Next, please. So that was a very quick introduction of the MCP and how it meets the requirements for platforms and how it is intended to serve as such a platform for e-navigation and digitalization at large. And more information about the MCP can be found on the website maritimeconnectivity.net. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you, Thomas and Dennis, for excellent presentations and very clear. I say that because we don't have a lot of questions in the chat, so it must have been very clear. Hey, Chai. But we have one question actually in the chat, and also I would encourage, if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand and or write it in the chat as we go along. The Maritime Connectivity Platform, Thomas, I would like to ask you, do you have any instances running already now, or is this just a concept on the paper at the moment?
There's well, we have three components of the MCP. We have the identity registry, service registry, and something called the messaging service, and they are on different levels of maturity. Right now, we only have operational instances of the identity registry. There's one operational instance of the MIR running by the Navalink consortium that was set up by Saab, Kongsberg, and Wärtsilä. And there's another one run by the Korean government. And there are several, so these are operational. And then there are several instances in Russia and Finland and a few other places as well. There are no, there are early stages of service registries and the MMS as well, but the MIR is the most mature part.
Okay, so this the interest in applying this concept and technology is basically worldwide. You talked about governments and industry, Korea and Europe. Excellent. One question has come up here: is the MCP more or less based upon the OSI model?
Well, there are. That I think maybe you can elaborate more on that, Dennis. But I think that is more on the actual communication level. I know that the OSI model has been talked about when we talk about the messaging service. So I don't think the OSI model is that relevant with regard to the identity registry or the service registry, but more relevant for the messaging service. Or what do you think, Dennis?
Yes, I would agree to you. So for the overall architecture of the MCP, I think the OSI model isn't that important. Maybe also for a subcomponent like the MMS, maybe it should be discussed in the working group there. But for the idea of our decentralized maritime connectivity platform and the different instances, yeah, it's not yeah, an important issue.
Okay, so
there's a question on what it takes to run an MCP.
Yeah, I can see that. Do you want to take over the moderator role, Thomas? Okay. There's a comment on that. I think that in terms of the OSI model, the MCP is basically in the application layer. Is that true? Dennis?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I'm not very familiar with that, but basically I think the MCP is a current running instance, so it also makes sense that it would be in the OSI model in the application layer, right?
I think when we talk about the MMS, the MMS is implementing a number of the lower levels of the OSI model.
Okay, well, there seems to be some room for discussion here on how to grasp what's going on. But now to the question you mentioned before, you saw, Thomas, you have a number of instances in various levels of maturity, and the question is, what will it take to be an MCP provider? How difficult is that? What do I? Yeah.
So again, taking the MIR. Then we have on the web page we have published a number of specifications on what a MIR needs to do. So basically, this is mainly the core of that is the ability to issue certificates following a specific format, which is specified in that document. And then also another thing that needs to be in place, because when you have an identity registry, you register at the top level. You register organizations in that registry, and then beneath the organizations, you can register other identities belonging to that organization. So another requirement there is that there are certain vetting procedures that you need to follow to assess the identity of the organizations in the MIR. So you need to implement the ability to issue these certificates, and you need to have a procedure in place to vet the organizations that are registered in your registry that you issue these certificates to. And then we actually have also a reference implementation, which is open source, that anybody can actually take and run that to lower the barrier to become an MCP instance provider. So that is something that is available that lowers the barrier for that. And then we have a procedure.
Sorry.
Yeah, then we have a simple procedure for us to endorse organizations that live up to these requirements, and then you'll basically be put on a list of endorsed MCP providers by the MCP consortium.
Ah, so there's a barrier. There is a door you have to enter, which is has to be opened by the consortium.
Well, you can run the MCP and not be endorsed, but there's no problem in that. Whether you want to call it an MCP or just something that resembles an MCP, but you can get endorsed by the MCP consortium. Okay, so now we're touching upon the trust element, which is at the core also. Yeah. So just elaborating a little bit on this. Clearly you would need to have a strong IT department to launch and operate an MCP. But and you mentioned examples of governments that do this, or governmental institutions and industrial consortiums, and maybe even a single company could do it. But would it be possible for an individual to actually run an MCP in the cloud and connect to this universe? Just an engineer like me. Well, you probably have problems getting endorsed, but technically it wouldn't be any big problem. I have a very good reputation. I think I'm. But yeah. Maybe exactly you. But okay. The thing is that if you want to be able to issue these types of certificates, then you have one basic first question is to answer. That is, do you want to run it yourself, or do you want to use this as a service by somebody else? And that is exactly what Navalink is doing. They are giving this as a service. So somebody that wants to be able to issue certificates can get that as a service from Navalink, or they can set up their own MCP if they want to do that. Yeah. Okay. Are there any more questions from the floor? I see none. I don't see any hands. There's something. Monica Sundklev from Sweden, my dear. Testing, etc., is also rather time-consuming, and that would need resources. Does it cost anything to be an MCP provider or being a member in the MCP community? Is there a licensing fee? Is basically the question. At this stage, no. It's free of charge, Monica. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay, it's a set of standards. Any other questions or comments? Raised hands? I don't see anything yet. Now, yeah. Can I elaborate a tiny little bit on that? Yeah. Because one of the purposes, again, of the open source reference implementation that we have is, again, to lower the barrier. And of course, we are trying to make that as mature as possible. And many parties are collaborating in testing that. But when somebody wants to run it, they need to take, I mean, we're not guaranteeing anything. So regardless of how much we're doing testing, which we are doing, then the organization actually running it needs to take the responsibility for doing that themselves. Yeah. Okay, so much about this possible candidate or example of one solution. But back to the guideline itself, which provides criteria against which such solutions should be evaluated. I'm getting bad network quality messages here. I hope you're hearing me. Let me know if I'm breaking up. And my question is, how will that happen? I must admit, I haven't actually studied that aspect in the document itself. So, who will the
IALA committees do this evaluation, or who's meant to do it, Dennis?
Yes, so it was a quite long process. I think we started with the document, correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, in the ENAV 25. And from there, it goes to the ENAV 26, 27, and so on. And yeah, we had basically in every ENAV session, our own working group on this document with different participants. We got a lot of input, and also the document changed quite often. So we got new requirements or new criteria into the document. We removed older ones. So it was quite a process. But at the end, in the last ENAV session, we thought that this document is in such a stage that everyone is lucky with, and then it also goes. It was basically published. So, but it was a very big or a very long process where many parties and different parties, authorities, and so on were involved.
Okay, so so that is the nature of the international work that we're doing. We gather experts from within our membership and in IALA, and we discuss until we can agree on something, and then we publish it as guidance. So basically, we could view this in the same way as we could view what Thomas has expressed here. He has matched the Maritime Connectivity Platform against these criteria that have been identified by the technical committee, and is making the case that this is probably a good example. This is maybe a candidate that could be agreed, more widely to be used than it is today, even. And others, the other alternatives should then try to match their solutions against these criteria, and then have a good chance of being viewed as good candidates. Excellent. I see no more questions at the moment. Is there anything the two of you want to add, or any thoughts that have cropped up? No. Okay. So then that brings us basically to the end of the event. However, I would like to say that as usual, we will be staying behind. The presenters will be staying behind if there are any informal questions that crop up as we close. We will stop the recording, and then we will still be here, some of us, to discuss and chat. And Greipur Gisli from Iceland, I would really like you to stay behind, because I need to talk to you on a totally different matter, by the way. So let me see. I would just like to remind you that today, the 30th of September, we celebrate the World Maritime Day. The IMO has chosen to make 2021 a year of action for seafarers who are facing unprecedented hardship during the COVID-19 pandemic, despite their vital role as key workers for global supply chains. The World Maritime theme for 2021, Seafarers at the Core of Shipping's Future, seeks to increase the visibility of seafarers by drawing attention to the invaluable role they play now and will continue to play in the future. So I would like to ask you to join me in saluting all seafarers around the world, wishing them all the best on this day, World Maritime Day. And actually, the IMO is hosting a webinar celebrating the World Maritime Day at 1100 UTC in 11 minutes. If you go to the IMO.org website, the IMO website, you should be able to find a link to their various media platforms, including a YouTube streaming channel, which streams this important event. And the Secretary General, Mr. Kita Glim, will deliver a message to the world. So take that opportunity if you can. Also, I have to say, of course, something about our intergovernmental project, the IALA Intergovernmental Project, IGO project. So since our inauguration in 1957, we have been an NGO, a non-governmental organization. And for the last 10 years, we have been working on changing that status. We have initiated a diplomatic process aimed at transforming the association into an intergovernmental organization. This process is now approaching the end, and a new international convention has been agreed to by some 50 countries, and this convention is now open for signatures by members of the United Nations, primarily coastal states, of course, and there's a window of opportunity to become the founding fathers of this new IALA, which started in January this year by the first signature of the host nation, France, the government of France. And now there are exactly 120 days remaining of the signature period, where those coastal states that sign now, or before the end of that period, they will become the, if you will, the founding fathers. And at the moment we have 15 signatures, and we need 30 in order to transform at the end of the day. 3 states have actually ratified or accepted the convention in their parliaments, which is a thing that follows the signature. And when 30 states have actually ratified the signatures, or the signatures in their parliament, then we transform into an intergovernmental organization. So if anybody has questions about that, I will be here for a moment after we close. Okay, I still see no questions or comments, so I will continue to close the webinar. The next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, the 14th of October, 10 o'clock UTC, same time. And this time we will focus on another guideline, 1081, which is on the use of virtual aids to navigation. So I welcome you all there, if you have the time and appetite to participate there. I'm actually quite happy to see the attendance at this webinar. We had over 50 participants from, I think, almost all continents except the Antarctica. So that was is impressive. Thank you for coming. So I thank the presenters for their excellent contribution to this webinar, and the participants for coming. And I hope that you have found the information provided interesting and useful. And I also hope that you and your loved ones can steer clear of the COVID-19, and please continue to keep your distance and keep well. This webinar is hereby closed. Thank you. So you can stop the recording.